attended today. It's great to have you all here, and we really hope we can offer you some inspiration about how Australians are thinking about sustainability and how their views and attitudes have been impacted by the bushfires of last summer, the bushfires which have started again, and COVID-19. We promise we're going to share with you some actionable insights on what consumers expect from future-proof companies like yours. But first, thank you. Thank you to one of our clients who has shared with those of you who gave us your address a small treat to help you stay focused during our webinar today. Thank you, Nestle, for making this session for those people even tastier. Much appreciated. If you missed out, you didn't give us your address or you were later in the registration. So next time, I'm sure we'll be able to get a tasty treat to you. This webinar is coming to you this morning in true Insights Consulting fashion, locally ignited, globally inspired, with the Sydney team working with Yuri, who's joining us from his rather late evening in Belgium. As a Sydney agency, we've been evolving over many years, and in this next slide, you'll see how we have expanded our network over the last years. Insights itself is over 23 years old, as is the Sydney team in its length in the Sydney market. Today, we are part of a global group with over 500 people serving 300 clients from 17 different locations around the world. We cover 17 markets, but while we do that, we are very focused in the Australian market with the clients we service from the Sydney office. On this next slide, you'll see a summary of some of the great brands the Sydney team enjoy working with today. So now you know who's in this virtual room with you today. I gladly pass the floor to Yuri, who will share the ins and outs of the two-part study we conducted in Australia to understand the changes from the bushfires of our last summer to the COVID-19 pandemic. July 19, October 2020, 4 generations. We uncover how each generation experiences and values sustainability. The floor is yours, Yuri.
Thank you very much, Erica, for this nice introduction, and welcome. Good morning to everyone attending this virtual event. Unfortunately, virtual event because I rather traveled to Australia to bring it to you live. Last time I was there, I really loved it. But as this presentation is about sustainability, we should also think about the CO2 emissions that I've saved actually, but by not flying around the globe to Australia, but doing this virtually or digitally. Now, I will talk in the next 70 minutes about how ethical conscious consumption is changing. And to make the 70 minutes a bit more digestible, I would like to make it interactive, and for that you will need your mobile phone. So you don't have to put your mobile phone away. Remotely, we all use our mobile phone while listening to speakers. But if you use your camera app on your phone and you scan the QR code, and I will do it myself to see if it works, then you should connect to this URL that is also below on the slide, pollev.com/Yuri, my first name, and then we can have a look at how everyone is feeling, to see at least some response. So the first question that you will have to answer is, how are you feeling today? Maybe some of you are feeling a bit anxious. There is eco-anxiety globally, and I think also increasingly in Australia because of the black summer of last year and the bad start of the summer, as Erica mentioned, this year again with the bushfires. So eco-anxiety, it's been discovered by psychologists. It was published in Psychology Today that it's a new form of anxiety that can actually be seen across people, and it's not yet in the DSM-5 and the Manual of Mental Disorders, not yet. But eco-anxiety is defined as people expressing high levels of stress over climate change in general. And it includes panic attacks, obsessive thinking, loss of appetite, even insomnia, not sleeping well at night. So let's have a look if people are voting already on the poll. If you just turned into this webinar, you can still scan the QR code on top of every time I will ask an interactive question, and then we immediately see the results popping up in the poll. So for the moment, I don't see anyone feeling negative, which is great news, but perhaps some of you haven't found the way to interact with this poll. So please scan the QR code with your camera app or go to the URL on top of the slide, pollf.com/Yuri, because throughout the presentation I will ask you some questions based on the replies we got from Australian consumers and see how well can you predict how Australian consumers have been responding to the survey that we did in the past months. So for the moment, some of you are feeling neutral, I can see. It's still morning, of course, on a Tuesday. It's not a Friday evening, but luckily I can also see some people having more green smileys, feeling better in the end. So it's good to see that you're participating in the survey, and other questions will pop up later on in the presentation. So we started from eco-anxiety and people feeling a bit anxious about climate change. And what we also saw, and it started with the youngest generation at first, Generation Z, is that they went from being anxious and worrying to worrying and becoming a warrior, an eco-warrior. And remember the climate protests, which before the COVID crisis were the big news every week almost, with Greta Thunberg and children skipping classes to go on the streets and have a protest. And in a global perspective, there were 7.5 million people at the end of last year, 2019, that participated in the global climate strike. And I know in Sydney alone, there were 20,000 people in December 2019 protesting, because their idea was that the government is not doing enough to address climate change. You see young people here protesting, but the global climate strike was global. It wasn't just young people. And to also have a look at the other side of the age groups, there is this famous guy, David Attenborough, that I'm sure you have seen before in his fantastic documentaries. And if you haven't seen this one, A Life on Our Planet, you can find it on Netflix. It's actually, he is giving a comment on how the climate has changed and how the planet has changed throughout his 94 years of living on Earth. And as you can see, he's 94 years old. The team behind David Attenborough also launched an Instagram page, which immediately after just a couple of weeks and almost no messages on Instagram, gathered 6 million people worldwide following a 94-year-old influencer. So influencer marketing and climate strikes, it's not only something Generation Z wants to do. I think the whole world today wants to make the world greater again, especially now that we lost Donald. We can finally do this in a good way. Now, one of the questions I get a lot is, yes, Yuri, but you're talking about climate protests at the end of 2019, but I'm not sure you know it, but something happened to the world in the meantime, and it's a bit related to this little ball here that is changing all of our lives, and it's also the reason why I'm standing here today. So perhaps this has an impact on how consumers are looking at the topic of sustainability. And did we hear a lot about Greta Thunberg lately? Not so much. And I know the climate protests are starting again. And I think also in Australia, it will become higher on the agenda again with the dry summers and the heat waves. But maybe with COVID, people were thinking more of, oh, can we please have some more fun again, especially after 112 days in lockdown, like in Melbourne. I want to get out, I want to have fun again. Or maybe people are more worried, some consumers are more worried and they want to have a world that is more safe again with face masks. So maybe clean is the new green. Clean, hygienic, not buying bulk, but buying vegetables and fruits packaged in plastic again, instead of the green alternative. So that's actually the reason, as Erica explained, that we replicated a study we already did in the summer of 2019 to see what's the impact of COVID-19 on consumer behavior and green thinking in 2020. And one of the main conclusions already, to start with the main finding, is that we saw an increase of the amount of Australian consumers that think sustainability is important to very important. It was 76% last year in July. Now, this year in October, it's 82%. So it's plus 6% in 1 year. This is not necessarily a COVID result, but at least we can see that 12 months later or 14 months later, even more Australian consumers think sustainability is important. And of course, we had the Black Summer of 2019 in between, and people get more educated about sustainability. We also asked direct questions in this study, and what we saw is that 7 out of 10 Australian consumers is concerned about wasting natural resources in general, and that 65% says climate change to me is as serious as the COVID-19 crisis. About as many Australians also said, 63%, that government, federal government, is not doing enough to address climate change and is a bit frustrated about that. So we can expect these protests and the topic of sustainability not only to stay important, but to have a greater importance in the upcoming months and years, also in Australia. Not sure if you're familiar with the Earth Overshoot Day. Earth Overshoot Day is the day on which we've used up all the planet's resources. And as you can see in this graph, and that's quite depressing, it's also what David Attenborough is telling in his documentary. Earth Overshoot Day is earlier and earlier every year, which means that in 2019, globally, July 29, we had used up all the planet's resources, and that means that we start to harm the planet with CO2 emissions that cannot be condensed anymore, or with deforestations, etc., etc. There's one figure missing, and that's the 2020 figure. That was August 2020 on a global scale. So we could be happy about this. At least it's one positive result of the COVID-19 crisis, is that the Earth Overshoot Day is 1 month later this year, almost. But if we look at it critically, it means that even with all the lockdowns we had globally, sometimes even factories not producing anymore, we're using less oil, we have less CO2 emissions, less traffic in the streets, even in this extreme different situation that, well, most of us think we won't keep this in the long term. But we still have an overshoot day, which is in August, which means we still need 1.6 planets actually to cater to all the needs of the global population. And to make this even a bit more sad, this is the overshoot day in 2020 in Australia. It was already on March 30, which means that 75% of the year, if everyone would live like an Australian worldwide, we were still destroying the planet. So we're still a long way from really solving the problem that David Attenborough is also addressing in his documentary. And one main conclusion is that we should switch our thinking. Up till now, we were thinking that sustainability is doing less harm to the planet. And even CSR experts and sustainability thought leaders like John Elkington, who created the famous triple bottom line model, he recalled his model last year. And his model said there's 3 P's. To be sustainable, we have to create profits, but by also doing better for people and better for the planet. So doing better for our profits people, and planet, the 3 Ps of the triple bottom line, we are becoming sustainable. As mentioned last year, after 25 years, John Elkington said, you know what, my model was wrong. And it's quite unusual that thought leaders are calling back recalling their models. Normally that's car manufacturers that do something like that when the brakes are not working. And it's a good idea to recall your model. But thought leaders saying, oh, my model was wrong, it doesn't happen too much. John Elkington was brave enough to do it. And he said, I'm recalling it because my model was wrong. It gave an alibi to companies to not launch more sustainable alternatives to their products, because as you can see, every P should be better. So if it's better for the planet and better for people, but not better for my profits, and better means even equal profits are not better, then we shouldn't launch it. So many sustainability options and projects were kept in R&D phase because it didn't lead to more margins or to more profits because of this triple bottom line model, which is why John Elkington said, this is not the way to look at sustainability. Actually, I was really wrong, sorry. And he introduced a new model. Of course, he also wrote a new book, so maybe that's why a thought leader recalls an old model, because he has a new book. And he wrote this book, Green Swans, and I'm sure you're familiar with the black swans because of the COVID crisis. But Green Swans, it's all about regen capitalism. And regen capitalism, it means instead of doing less harm, we should restore and replenish what we have lost in the past. So the harm we have done to the planet, we should try to make up for that by rethinking the systems, capitalism, by rethinking products. Maybe not every product that we're launching is really relevant. Should we launch a product that doesn't add value just to make profits? If it leads to more overconsumption, maybe we should think better before we launch something. We should rethink how people are living. I will give an example of that, but also how businesses are organized and how we are globally collaborating together. And typically in capitalism, it's quite competitive, which means we don't work together with our competitors. So we try to avoid it. We try to be better than our competitors. But in a sustainable society, if we want to address climate change, we have to collaborate. We cannot solve climate change on our own, between our own walls of our own company. And luckily, some multinationals already saw this a couple of years ago, and 25 multinationals, including big ones like Mars, Nestle, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, etc., they are working together with TerraCycle, a recycling organization, and UPS, the delivery service, to use the milkman's model, the old milkman's model who put his milk bottles at your home in a glass bottle. And when you have used your milk, you put your glass bottle outside of the door and he picked it up again, it went back and it was reused again. So basically the milkman's model is what Loop is doing. They're creating durable containers of the 25 different multinationals. UPS is delivering it in a box and you deliver the empty durable containers back to the company. It's still in the test phase, so they're working together also with retailers worldwide to see if this really helps to create a more sustainable solution. Now, in general, we talk about climate plus commerce. Climate plus commerce means it's still commerce, business, but we are regenerating the climate. So instead of taking something away from our planet, destructing the planet, we bring something on the planet. And a good example is coming from the Nordics, from Denmark, Attenborough, where there's a business park that has been constructed to actually be carbon negative instead of even being carbon neutral or less carbon emission. They're talking about we have a carbon negative circular system in which the 9 businesses are using each other's wastes and energy surplus to reuse in their own factory. And so the business park is built around these 9 businesses to become carbon negative in the end, which also means that in the process of producing and having byproducts, they want to get rid of the byproducts, not by wasting them, but by upcycling them or getting them reused by some of the other companies within the Kallenberg business park. So sustainability in 2020, it's not TBL anymore, triple bottom line, but we should think of climate plus thinking. But what does that actually means for Australian consumers? What does sustainability as a concept mean for Australian consumers? And you will see this open-ended text box on your mobile phone, where you can enter words. Preferably you enter one word. What do you think consumers would answer on this open-ended question? If we ask them, what does sustainability mean for you in one word? What would they answer? So use one word and then we will see the results popping up in the word cloud. So what does sustainability mean to consumers? If we would ask Australian consumers, name one word to describe sustainability in your own words, which is the word they would use. I will come back to the poll later on, but firstly I will explain that if we look at the concept of sustainability, which is quite complex, it typically has three different components that we see in various qualitative research. People are talking about sustainable products, they're better for myself, for my own health. It means they are free from chemicals, they are bio, they are natural, they have an impact on my health. So that's the right side of this slide. Of course, the core aspect of sustainability is environmental responsibility. And then we talk about responsible sourcing and production, but also reducing, reusing, recycling the ingredients, the packaging, but also restoring, repairing, refurbishing, decreasing the CO2 emissions in transport and production. So that's the environmental responsibility, or it's better for the planet, you could say. And then to the left side of the slide, it's all about an ethical and a fair business. So that's fair trade. It's about the well-being of humans, but also the well-being of animals. It's about fair wages for everyone in the supply chain, also about diversity and inclusivity and equality and giving back to communities. Now, what we typically see in our research is that consumers confuse the different parts of this definition, which means if you claim to be organic, natural, they almost immediately think, okay, this is also made in an ethical way, so it's fair trade, and also it's better for the environment, so it's sustainable, you could say. So they confuse these terms because it's not because something is fair trade that it's per definition also organic or the other way around. It also means that they have some conflicts in their head. If they see bio vegetables in grocery stores that are packaged in plastics, which plastics to them means it's not environmental responsible, then they say, okay, I want natural products, bio products, but I don't want plastics. Why don't they sell it in another type of packaging? So it's really conflicting in the heads, you could say, of the consumers. So let's have a look at the words that you were answering on the poll. And there's only one popping up for the moment. It's reusing. I'm waiting a bit to see if we have other words in this word cloud popping up. Maybe my question was a bit too difficult. And I'm really making this webcast difficult because there's a time lag between me presenting and actually also showing this to you. So having a live poll, that's really tricking the system, especially if Australia is that far from Belgium, from where I'm presenting today. So adaptation, I see reusing. So reusing in the environmental part, you could call it in the center. Adaptation, I'm not sure what you mean with it. Adapting to something. I can see green popping up, and green is becoming bigger, which means more people are posting that green would be the one word to describe sustainable. So green, that's really the center of the previous slides. It's about environmental responsibility. Everything that has to do with recycling, you can see recyclable, recycling coming up. Eco-friendly, so again, that's all in the center of environmentally responsible. Clean as well. Clean can be defined in different ways. It can be fair trade, which means socially clean, but it can also be environmentally clean, and it can even be clean in terms of ingredients. So clean is a good word because it's describing the three different parts. Of course, sustainable is also long-term. It's also about durability, as you mentioned. It's about accountability as well, as some of you has entered in the word box. It's about the planet. It's about neutrality, about eco-friendliness. But the main word popping up is green. It's long-term impact, environmental, and recycling. So this is your answer to what is the one word that consumers would use when they would have been asked this question, which is exactly what we did, of course, in our study. So to explain the three parts again, but now a bit easier, I will use an example of a product category that has been proven to be crucial to mankind. And it's toilet paper, because the first thing people did when they heard about lockdowns and a virus was they were hoarding toilet paper as much as possible. And there's this Australian brand that I like to use. It's a DTC, direct-to-consumer premium brand of toilet paper, Who Gives a Crap, which is basically built about the three aspects that we just discussed. So to the right, good for your bum, that's better for your own health because we are not using any chemicals. To the left, good for the world and being B Corp certified. It's all about environmentally impact, so the center of our slide. And then there's also good for people, which is the social dimension, and the responsibility on the left side of the slide, so the fair trade, you could say, but also social causes and charity. Now, if we look at these different claims, the one in the middle, good for people, that's really the differentiator, because there's many toilet paper brands that will say, oh, we are FSC certified, Forest Stewardship Council. It means whenever we take a tree down to create paper, we plant a new tree. Or we only use trees from managed forests like that. There's many toilet papers that do that. In fact, if you're a toilet paper brand and you're not doing that, you're doing completely wrong because consumers won't appreciate it. So it's not really a differentiator. It is more a defensive shield, you could say. It becomes like the base good practice in your own industry. And the same could be about in several regions, it's better for your health. We don't use chemicals, but that could also be a differentiator in other regions. So it depends on the market, of course, on the consumer, on the industry you're in. Coming back to Who Gives a Crap, the real differentiator is good for the people. What they're doing is they're donating half of all the profits to people who don't have access to clean toilets. And they say on a global scale, there's 2 billion people in emerging and developing markets that don't have access to clean toilets, which is more than the amount of people that have access to a mobile phone. And that's crazy. So they want to change this. Of course, it's related to their own business by helping charity organizations that build clean toilets around the world. So that's good to know. There are two complementary brand strategies when using sustainability claims. The first one is a defensive shield, and the second one is differentiating from competition. Now let's have a look at how Australian consumers look at this word sustainability. So if we analyze the open-ended results, the top-of-mind associations, we see that the number one was, it was about reducing, but it was about reducing food waste, and recycling, as you mentioned yourself, was also in the top three, reducing packaging, virgin plastics also in this top 5, and also they're restoring and replenishing nature. What you also see, and it's number 2, together with recycling, is reducing water, and I didn't see that mentioned immediately in your answers. And of course, this is related to the dry and heat summers that you've had in the past, and the results of that specifically in Australia and the bushfires. We also see that restoring and replenishing nature. Think of Fraser Island for the moment, which is really a disaster considering the UNESCO forests and woods that are being destroyed by the bushfires. So restoring and replenishing nature, it's also becoming more important for Australian consumers, as is reducing CO2 emissions. And these are all related a bit also not only to the bushfires and to the Black Summer, but also to the lockdowns, because what we asked in our survey was to what extent did the lockdown make you revalue nature and the importance of clean air? And more than 6 out of 10 Australian consumers said, yeah, that's the case. I revalue nature again because of the lockdown, because also in cities could feel a difference, could feel a better air quality when there was a lockdown. So CO2 emissions, it's becoming more important in the strategy of a business and of companies as well. And one example is Ford, for instance, in the automotive. Ford has hybrid vans, of course, so combining electricity with old fossil fuel. And they have installed a geofencing plug that takes into account the location of the van. And whenever the van is entering a low emission zone, a city center, or a sensitive area, which could be, for instance, a school, then it pushes the van automatically to the battery, so to electric energy sources, so that there is zero emissions at that point in that specific location. And you don't have to do anything as a driver. Of course, your battery needs to be charged, but the Ford plug is pushing the car into less CO2 emissions in sensitive areas. Also in food, in FMCG, we see brands like Oatly, and I know how much you love your coffee in Australia, and the barista bars. Many barista bars have switched to oat milk, to a plant-based alternative, and I will come back to that topic later on. And Oatly is really good in branding this and in doing marketing, using CO2 emissions and saving CO2 emissions by using an alternative for cow milks, because we know that cows, they produce a lot of greenhouse gases. And what they're also doing is on the packages of their products, they are transparently printing what the carbon footprint is. And then they do the poster campaigns, as you can see to the left, in which they call out to the industry to show your numbers. And of course, they know if a cow dairy brand is doing the same, that the number will be much higher, of course. Another example also coming from Australia is Belong, the telco provider that is carbon neutral, and that created this personal test in which you can test for yourself what the footprint is of using your mobile phone and different items on your mobile phone, reading an email, going to Facebook, Instagram, etc. Because that's quite invisible, and many people, especially young people who are involved with the planet, they often forget that by using social media and your mobile phone, you're also contributing to the CO2 emissions. Actually, they calculated that in Australia alone, an estimated 500,000 tons of CO2 every year comes from the data centers, the data networks that are supporting your mobile phone usage. So with this app and with this specific test, you can test based on your own behavior how much CO2 you're emitting, and then you can switch, of course, to Belong as the carbon neutral telco operator. So for them, it becomes a differentiator from competition in the end. Also in the finance industry, you have Doconomy working together with MasterCard, And they created a credit card that gives you a monthly overview, not only of your expenses, like every credit card is doing, but also of the CO2 emissions that were created by shopping at a certain shop, by buying a certain product. And they're using the Holland index, which is a famous index that is keeping track of all products that companies are creating, so that you can see on your monthly statement how much CO2 emission did I actually buy this month. And they also created this black card that you can see on the slide, which has a limit to your carbon limit, to your carbon buying. Normally, a credit card has a financial limit, but in this case, your transactions are denied, not because you're above a financial limit, but because you're above a carbon limit. So even in the financial industry, where green bonds and responsible investing becomes more important, especially if you address millennials and younger generations, also credit cards, we are already seeing this type of campaigns. Then recycling programs. And I think Erica already mentioned our partner today in this event, Nestle. And I think at the end of our session, Erica will dive deeper into this case where we did some research on switching the logo, the KitKat logo, to the recycle logo, to actually stimulate people to recycle the packaging in the red cycle bins, for instance, at Coles. But Erica will tell more about that. Another example of Nestle is actually what they're doing with the Nespresso brand. As you know, they're using aluminium capsules for the quality of the Nespresso coffee. And aluminium can be 100% recycled and reused. So that's good, but of course, then every user, every consumer should recycle the aluminium in the right way and shouldn't throw it just away with all the rest of the waste. And they have specific recycle bags, and to actually stimulate you to recycle, they're doing these campaigns in which they are upcycling the aluminium, not only reusing it in new aluminium capsules, but also showing, listen, you can also create other products with the capsules that you are giving back to us. So they made with Philosophy, which is a Swedish bike startup, they created a limited edition of 1,000 bikes made from 300,000 arpeggio capsules. And they also work together with a Swiss brand, Caran d'Ache, to create these pens actually that are made of one Nespresso arpeggio capsule. If you go on the website of Nespresso, by the way, also in Australia, you can easily find where you can leave your capsules behind. So for instance, as a location, I gave the Sydney Opera House, and then immediately it shows you 32 results of surrounding recycling points for the capsules, which can be very close. Of course, every Nespresso boutique has the recycle bins where you can leave your used aluminium capsules, but also with florists, as you can see to the left side of the screen, they pick up the capsules again. So having a recycling program installed, that's important also to Australian consumers, as you can see. And then circular and self-sustaining. Circular is gaining traction and self-sustaining communities as well. There's one example of a self-sustaining community in the Netherlands, in Almere, that is being built for the moment. There are 202 homes that have solar panels, of course, that have a green roof, but they're also growing their own vegetables. They have fish in the waterways. They are reusing the wastewater, but also reusing your food waste. So if you have food waste, you throw it in the river actually, and then the fish is eating the food waste, and you're growing the fish that you will catch later on to have your meal in the evening. And of course, if you live in this city, you won't be able to drive a fossil fuel car. You have to drive an electric car. Otherwise, you won't get into this specific city. So rethinking the way people are living becomes more important. Circular cradle-to-cradle concepts become more important. I think IKEA is one of the companies that is deliberately choosing this path to sustainability. So they're going for a circular system, which means that they're already promoting take back and buy back programs. in which you can resell your old furniture to IKEA. You actually bring it back and you get a voucher or a discount on the next furniture you buy at IKEA. They can recycle and reuse the wood again. And they're also designing the products to be recycled and reused again. So really creating this circular system. By 2030, they want to be 100% circular in the end. So what we've talked about up till now is actually two brand strategies, a defensive shield strategy and a competitive advantage. We also talked about what does sustainability mean for Australian consumers. It's a holistic concept and CO2 emissions become the new currency. And we moved from triple bottom line to climate plus. Now, important in all these connotations we have with sustainability is, of course, choosing the right missions. And choosing the right mission, it's 5 questions actually. It's why should we be involved with our company or our brand in this specific sustainability mission? For instance, circularity. Is it something that really fits with our brand? And that's one of the key success factors of your sustainability branding program is, do our consumers see the fit with our brands and with our categories? Is it credible? Do we have a permission to play for the consumers? That's quite important. So is it relevant to them? What we're trying to do, does it really make a difference? And for relevance, we need, of course, to hear the consumer's voice. Can we claim it? Are we better than our competitors in doing this? Or can we become better than our competitors in claiming this sustainable item? And is it engaging and campaignable? In the end, these are not internal questions. It means we should ask it to our target groups, to our markets. It's external, our customers, our consumers. So it's built on insights and maybe even more important on foresights. Because if we're not just looking for defensive shields, but also for competitive advantages, it means we have to find something before our competitors are finding it. We have to find what is relevant for our market, which part of sustainability that really resonates with them, that can be linked to our brand, in which we have the permission to play, and in which we can be better than our competitors before he or she knows it as well. So that's foresighting. It's also talking to leading edge consumers in the end. So let's have a look at the current mainstream consumer and what is the mindset actually of the Australian consumer today. And what we see is that there are 6 out of 10, so the majority is definitely quite positive. They want to change their own buying habits to have a positive impact on the environment. It's even higher with Gen X, and it's lower with Gen Z, which might be counterintuitive, but I will come back to that later on. Let's have a look at the different habits that people can have in their own homes. Consumer habits that are more conscious, that are more sustainable. And you will find 3 options that you can respond. They're either using up leftovers, limiting their own water usage, or refusing plastic bags in shops. So you will find these 3 options on the Poll Everywhere tool. And I will come back to your answers later on. I don't want to influence your own opinion, of course, but I have to talk a bit so that you have the time to answer the question. So let's talk about the plastic demon. The plastic demon is sometimes seen as the next enemy for consumers in general, for NGOs, for organizations, after sugar, you could say. So it becomes more important for businesses, and it's also the reason why Coca-Cola Amatil in Australia made a decision to go for 100% recycled plastics, not using virgin plastics anymore, but really recycled PET bottles. Up till now, they've reached this milestone where they can create all the small bottles, maximum 600 milliliters in Australia, with rPET, and of course the goal is next year to also transfer the bigger bottles to 100% rPET. And they did this nice Australian campaign that I will show you while you're still voting on the question in your mobile phone.
now made from 100% recycled plastic.
So the Lady Bird campaign, you can call it a fantastic campaign that started in Australia actually, and that is stimulating people to recycle. Now let's have a look at your votes and what you think Australian consumers are doing the most at home. And the majority of the participants, 68% for the moment, answered it's refusing plastic bags in shops. Number 2 is using up leftovers, according to you. And it's only a very small minority of you saying it's about limiting water usage. So let's have a look at the results. And the number 1 was not refusing plastic bags. Although, as you can see, it's also in the top 4. But the number 1 was really using up leftovers. On 4, it's refusing plastic bags. And in between is actually limiting water usage. And as you can see, we saw the biggest move in the top results, again about water usage linked to the dry summers. This can also be an inspiration to create new product ranges, which is actually what Procter & Gamble has done at first in South Africa. In South Africa, Cape Town in 2018, they had a very dry summer as well. And it inspired Procter to come up with a waterless hair care range for which you don't need not a drop of water actually to wash your hair or to use your conditioner. Inspired actually by a crisis, again, an innovation from Procter & Gamble. Let's have a look back at this graph. You can see that some other things might have been influenced by COVID, like for instance, buying more local instead of imported, because I think the COVID crisis, yeah, it's kind of gave us an insight on how globalized our economy is and for which products and ingredients we're dependent, for instance, on China when they were in lockdown. So buying more local became more important, buying seasonal. Also, we lived more at home, especially the cities that, like in Victoria, that were in a serious lockdown of a long time, 112 days in the second wave. So we are more confronted with our own energy usage and invoices. So we try to reduce energy use at home. It's also growing. And of course, our holidays were totally different than other years, choosing more holidays with cars, trains and buses instead of using a plane, maybe because it wasn't possible at all, but also because we are increasingly becoming, all of us consumers, reducitarians. We are reducing sugar, reducing meat, reducing dairy, reducing waste. So that becomes more important. So it also means we're trying to reduce meat products, which is something that, for instance, baby boomers, especially in Australia, they're quite hesitant. It's more something we see with the young generation, Generation Z on one hand, but on the other hand, also their parents, Generation X. So both generations, Generation X parents and Gen Z children, together they're eating less meat, they're becoming more flexitarians, and it could be influenced by your kids because we create one meal for our family. But we definitely see that it's the both generations that are in one household that are changing their behavior over there. So meet and greet, written in a different way. What we see across the world is flexitarians who, for instance, during one certain month in January, for instance, in the UK, they decide to not eat meat at all or no meat products at all. So it's veganuary, I cannot even pronounce it, instead of January. And if they want to see the impact of this, you can see it on the website of this campaign, showing that you're not only saving CO2 emissions, and they compare it to flights, but also saving waterways and saving water, and of course the life of animals. So there is a clear link also between the meat industry and water scarcity, which will become clearer, more and more clear in the next 10 years when, according to the UN, 1/4 of the world's largest cities will be classified as water scarce. So of course, this flexitarians, it leads to service restaurants, fast service restaurants like Burger King, introducing Impossible Burgers, Impossible Whoppers, together with Impossible Meat. McDonald's is also working together with Beyond Burgers, so meat replacers in the end to address this growing flexitarian community, you could say. Even in the fashion business, you see that ASOS is not selling clothes that are made from fur, feather, bone, silk, mohair, cashmere, and angora anymore because of animal welfare. And I'm a big fan of the series The Crown. So I also read that the Queen is no longer wearing real fur anymore. So it has an impact on the fashion industry as well. Talking about the fashion industry, what do you think is the world's most fashionable, most sustainable fashion brand or sports brand? Would that be Adidas? And that's option A. Or do you think the world's most sustainable fashion brand is Gucci? So you have the choice between, on one hand, Gucci, luxury brands, or on the other hand, Adidas, a sports brand when it comes to sustainability. While you're answering, I will give you the example of how Nike is working towards sustainability. They have the Move to Zero campaign, and they are, since this year, reusing factory scraps to create a new range of shoes. This is the Flyknit Vapor Max 2020. And it's made of at least 50% of recycled materials coming from the scraps of the factory. And whenever you buy a recycled shoe like this, you will see the windmill on the left upper corner of the shoebox, which means that this is a more sustainable product that you're buying. There's also a QR code on the packaging, and if you scan it in augmented reality, you will see different parts of Nike's sustainability strategy, what they're doing, not only in creating recycled products, but also in distribution centers. They explain that they use only renewable energy to decrease the CO2 emissions, while you're just using your mobile phone to have a look at your packaging. Let's have a look at your answers. I think the majority clearly says 2/3 it's Adidas, and it's even increasing. And as you can see, only 1/3 of you is saying Gucci is the most sustainable brand. And most of you are wrong, actually, because according to Corporate Knights, which does a global 100 of most sustainable companies in every industry, but also in fashion, Gucci is the #1 in the fashion industry, and it's based on 21 different KPIs that they're investigating. So it's not a case that you submit as a company, but they just look at the publicly disclosed data and reports. And they say the Kering Group, the multinational above Gucci, is on #23. Then there's H&M on #27. And on #55, it's Adidas. So Kering, as a luxury brand, are not expressively saying that they're sustainable, but since 2010, they're investing in becoming more sustainable, using less carbon emissions, creating less pollution and waste. And as a shareholder on the Kering corporate website, you will find the EP&L, and that's an environmental profit and loss, where you can find for every category and every product what is the environmental profit and loss of each product and how Kering is actually calculating the total supply chain impact of their products. Now, talking about fashion, it's a question I get a lot in Q&As is, yeah, the young generation, they're protesting about climate, but how do you explain that they want fast fashion and they buy cheap discount clothes? And the answer is, of course, the biggest enemy of sustainability is convenience. And it's not the only enemy. We know from our study in Australia that half of the Australians are stating that they are living sustainably for the moment, which means that the other half is not living sustainably. And if you ask the half that says, I'm not living sustainably, why not? Then we get the barriers to sustainability. And one of the main things they're saying is it's too expensive. If I want to buy a sustainable alternative, it costs more than a non-sustainable alternative. So that's the fast fashion example, you could say. Or it's too hard to get, I cannot find sustainable options, so I just take the easy one. That's convenience, but also accessibility. Sometimes they say, I don't know which brands are more sustainable than other brands, or I don't know how to live more sustainable. I need some advice. That's education. Or what's my reward? What do I get from buying a sustainable option? Or I simply forget to reuse my bag, so I need to be reminded and rewarded for doing that. So these 5 barriers can also be 5 drivers to drive your consumers to live more sustainable and to go for the sustainable alternative that you are launching. One example of affordability, it's Unilever. Unilever, who created the eco refills. It's a small plastic packaging, as you can see, but it's recycled plastic. And you buy the refill, and of course you dilute the home care brand at your own home, which saves plastic. It's recyclable plastic, and it also saves space in the transport, which means 87% less trucks on the road, also affecting the CO2 emissions. And in the end, the product, because you can save in production costs and in transport costs, they can give the product at a lower price point than the regular large bottle. So there's also win-win. It's more affordable for the consumer as well. So again, sustainability, it doesn't always mean that you're losing margins, because if you use less materials, if you use less energy, less transport, you're saving costs, which can actually lead to a better price point for your client. And if you are able to do that, then you will change the climate and the planet and also consumer behavior. Accessibility, it's another example. I already said it's too hard to live sustainable. So this is a personal care brand, Beauty Kitchen in the UK, that is placing refill machines like this, not only in grocery and retail stores, but also at university campuses, train stations, garden centers, beauty salons, and bigger office complexes, to make it very close to the consumer to refill his personal care product. So that's working on accessibility. You can also work on affordability and convenience and ease together. For instance, with food surplus or food waste apps. I think you have Bring Me Home, for instance, in Australia. Too Good To Go is another app that is used a lot in Europe, where you can, based on your location, immediately see where you can get a nice deal, reductions between 30 and 75% on foods from hotels, from restaurants, that you can take just before the closing hours, which is saving the meal from getting thrown away. It still gives some money to the restaurant, and it's also giving you a reduction. So again, it's a win-win, and it's convenient because you can locate it using the app. Reminding and rewarding. This is a reversed vending machine, so it takes back the product instead of giving you a product. You put your plastic bottle inside the reverse vending machine, it recycles the bottles or retakes it, and this is placed in the metro stations in Rome, where you get credit on your travel card, your metro card, whenever you throw plastic inside this reverse vending machine. So that's reminding you to recycle, but also giving you a reward if you do it. And then education, it can be a brand name. This is a brand name that literally communicates what he or what the brand wants you to do. So Stop the Water While Using Me is the brand name. And it's a brand that it's all about not using virgin plastics, only using recycled plastics, using less water in the creation of the product. It was acquired by Biospheres, the big German multinational known from Nivea, for instance, as a startup brand that communicates more sustainable behavior. So that's the conscious mindset. We started with talking about there's a difference between the mindset of consumers who all want to change their habits, but if you look at their habits and how much they're changing it, well, it's not because we think we're living sustainable that we're already showing the habits. On the other hand, we are moving more towards reducitarian behavior, flexitarian behavior, for instance, but convenience is the main enemy of sustainability. As brands, we can work on the barriers, which means it's not only what you say in your communication and branding, it's also how you say it. So it's about educating and reminding people that it can be affordable, accessible, easy and rewarding to choose for the sustainable option. Let's move to the last part, and it's all about good business is a good business, which means the business case of sustainability. And in general, 61% of Australians would agree with the statement that sustainable brands are more up to date. They also, half of Australians say sustainable brands have a higher quality. Half of the Australian consumers are saying it, and it's plus 10% compared to 1 year ago. So it's definitely something that is progressing in a way that you cannot avoid to become more sustainable in the future. If you look into academic studies, there's this one study that's really interesting of London Business School and Harvard Business School. They compared 90 high ESG, that stands for environmental, social, governance, high ESG companies that are at about 40% of sustainability things that you can implement in your company. These companies are doing that, and they compared them with low ESG companies that have maximum 10% of the possible environmental and social concerns that you can tackle implemented in their company. Then they looked in the long term from 1992 to 2010, 18 years, and they compared the shareholder value. So when you invested $1 in 1992 in a high ESG company, it brought you $22.6 in 2010. So even after the start of the economic financial crisis, when you did the same amount of investment in a low ESG company, it only led to $15.4. So there's a shareholder advantage in investing in companies that even in the 90s were already involved with environmental and social practices. They also compared the yearly financial performance, and what they saw is that in 11 out of the 18 years, the high ESG companies outperformed the low ESG companies. So yes, there is a business case for sustainability, in case you were doubting, and there are also 4 different benefits of branding more sustainable. The first one is creating awareness and creating a preference for your products. And especially with accelerated fragmentation of media, also because of COVID-19, people are subscribing to more streams on TV, they're playing more games, they're dividing their attention between more social media. So it's harder to get your eyeballs and reach, especially if you do a campaign for every single brand or product line. So it makes sense to find something that is like an umbrella statement that you make for your different brands, which basically comes back to sustainability for many corporates and multinationals. Now, one example of building awareness and preference comes from the transport industry. This is Deutsche Bahn, a German railway company that before COVID-19 was already promoting staycations. And what they did is they bought Facebook advertising targeted on Facebook pages of people who are who have in their interests travel as main interest, and we're also posting pictures of international travels they were doing. And then they posted, or they showed this programmatic advertising comparing international landmarks like the Tower Bridge, for instance, to similar national landmarks in Germany that only cost you a train ticket of 19 euros. So comparing the affordability of going to London from Munich to, in that case, Berlin. They also compared Venice to Hamburg with these nice pictures, and even Arizona with Rhineland in Germany. It costs you 1,156 euros to go to Arizona and only 19 euros to go to Rhineland with a Deutsche Bahn German rail ticket. Now, it was a very successful campaign. It led to almost 9 times as many click-throughs than with previous Facebook campaigns, and also to an increase in revenue. So yes, it can lead to more preference, it can lead to more revenues. To talk about sustainability on one hand, combined in this case with affordability and a nice visual campaign. The second reason to do sustainable branding is defending your own reputation and having the license to operate. If you're not doing that, there's always the risk of being boycotted by consumers for not being sustainable. And we saw in our results that a quarter of Australians have already boycotted a brand, and it's going up, as you can see, plus 11% compared to last year. These are mainly millennials, where 41% of Australian millennials is mentioning that they already boycotted the brand, and it's not something that many baby boomers are doing, as you can see in the results. So of course you have boycotting of consumers, but also NGOs like Greenpeace, in this case attacking Mattel, the brand or the company behind Barbie, calling them barbaric at the headquarters of Mattel. There's a lot of cameras and press that is filming this because Mattel was using paper coming from non-FSC forests in the end. So the second reason is defend your own brand image and your own reputation. Third one is creating new relevant innovations and market developments. And a good example of that is Arla, who wanted to create, who actually wanted to address the Chinese market with their yogurt, but they understood that the Chinese wanted ambient yogurt that's not refrigerated. So they had to create an innovation for this, and they made it their own first clean label ambient yogurt to address a new market while being more sustainable in the end. And then the last benefit of sustainable branding is, of course, employee engagement. And we all know that both millennials and Gen Z, they are choosing employers that reflect their own values and that reflect their own purpose in life. We already saw with big tech companies that suddenly 8,700 Amazon employees were writing an open letter to Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, to address him and ask him to do more for the climate crisis. And also the big walkout that Google and Microsoft and Amazon experienced during the global climate strikes as well. In general, and that's the last part of this presentation, communication is quite critical when it comes to sustainability, because if you don't communicate actively, which is what many companies are doing for the moment, 7 out of 10 consumers think you're not sustainable. So not communicating is also communication. So start with communicating. Now, these are the 4 golden rules that you should keep in mind when communicating. The first one is setting a long-term commitment. And why is that important? If you only talk about what you're doing today, but not on your plans of tomorrow, it's possible that consumers can see this as it's a campaign, right? It's just to sell me something. So there's not a long-term commitment. It's not clear to them that you're really serious about it. So talk about the long-term commitment. For instance, Volvo Cars on their website is talking about how they want to become climate neutral by 2040. That's still 20 years from now. But how they want to make a first tangible step already in 2025 by reducing the CO2 emissions per car by 40%. And then they are also doing this campaign stating that Volvos are rubbish. That's what Volvo says themselves in their campaign, with the plastic bottle in the shape of a car, saying that they are aiming to use 25% of recycled plastics in their cars by 2025. So the first thing, long-term, real commitment. The second thing, talk about the sustainable journey. So celebrate the moments that you're actually achieving something extraordinary. Heineken, for instance, the brewery, since 2010 has been working on using more green energy in the brewing process. It also involves using electric trucks, for instance, and using the byproducts of creating a beer, but also wind energy to become a 100% green energy company. This year, they finally obtained it. They're able to create all Heineken brands in the Netherlands with 100% green energy. And they did this poster campaign, a consumer touchpoint campaign, stating that this is our new ingredient. It's actually the energy, the green energy. So they're celebrating that specific moment. Thirdly, be always transparent and open about commercial motives. I'm not sure if you saw it, but Unilever last week talked about the fact that they're investing more in plant-based foods. And the first bullet point you will see in their press release and on their website is that they're talking about the $1 billion sales that they are targeting with this plant-based meat and dairy alternatives within 5 to 7 years. So the first bullet point is actually about their own commerce, about their own business. They're quite open about this, and they've always been that open about sustainable living brands, stating that it's leading to 69% growth of their business in the end. In the same way, they will halve the food waste and they will deliver more positive nutrition. But the first point is they're open about their own motives. Why is that important? We're living in a post-greenwash age where only 53% trust brands that claim to be sustainable. And that's grown since 2009, but still Generation Z and baby boomers in Australia are quite skeptical about sustainability claims. So this transparency, it's important, and we see that 75%, 3/4 of Australians says brands should become more transparent and provide additional information on their packaging, on how sustainable they are, and guide us in deciding if it's a product we want to use. Now, the next and last question in my presentation, before we end the presentation and go to the cases and the Q&A, is which ingredients or labels are checked the most on grocery packaging specifically. And you have some options that you will find in your tool. Provenance, where the products come from, are one of the options. But which ingredient or which label is checked the most by Australians on grocery packages, you think nowadays? We call this trend flip side shopping. So instead of looking at the brilliant packaging you've made, the front side, I turn it and they immediately look at the ingredient lists or the labels that you are printing on the back side of the package. And again, 3/4 of Australians, they agree that brands should become more reliable and should give more reliable and accessible ways, certifications, certain logos, to be able to evaluate the sustainability of the brand. There's even this example of Heinz that changed their own distinctive assets, which is the front side of the packaging, by printing the back side of the packaging on the front, because they understood flip side shopping in Brazil. And actually to emphasize that there's nothing unnatural inside Heinz ketchup bottle, they were printing the ingredient lists on the front side. So tracking and tracing becomes more important, but the problem is there's so many different eco-labels. At the moment, 463 are used worldwide, so it's quite confusing for a consumer to really understand what does natural mean, what does bio mean, what does organic mean. Coming back to your answers, which ingredients or labels are checked the most on grocery packaging? For the moment, your number one is sugar, but you can see that the graph is still evolving, so people are still voting. But sugar stays the number one. Number two is the provenance. And number three is the calorie count. No one is choosing carbs, and natural is then the number four. Let's have a look at the Australian results. So the provenance, actually, where the product is made, is currently the number one. And you can also see that compared to the results of 2019, it went plus 11%. And if we only look at the females and the women in Australia, it's even 42%, so much higher, and also, of course, the number one of what is checked first before buying a grocery item. So where the product comes from, the provenance, it becomes more important. You also see locally produced, it's also in the top 5, then sugar, and then natural. And as you mentioned, calories, for instance, is a bit lower in this graph. Terroirism, this is not terrorism. I know the visual can be confusing, but terroirism, it refers to the terroir, a French terroir of the wine, or an Australian wine, of course, where the terroir actually expresses the quality of the wine, because that's quite important as an indicator of this is a nice wine coming from that specific domain. We see that it increasingly becomes important for food products, fresh produce, and of course, Coles and retailers in general are more communicating about what they're doing locally, supporting, for instance, Australian farms. 96% of the fresh produce sold at Coles local is coming from Australia. But also giving back to local communities becomes more important. So it's clear that local, and especially after COVID, as I mentioned before, becomes a more important aspect of sustainability. We also saw natural, and natural, it also went up with 10% when we compared it to 2019. Now, natural, that's not only important for food products, it's typically important for products you put in you or on you. So also for cosmetics and personal care. And we have this example that was launched, a brand, Cora Organics personal care brand, cosmetic brand, launched by the famous Australian model. I've heard the first Australian Victoria's Secret model, Miranda Kerr, which is all about clean beauty, so natural, organic, no chemicals inside. And then I want to stop my presentation with the last golden rule of communication, and that's all about keeping your brand's tone of voice. Too often when companies start to communicate about sustainability, it's another department taking over. It's the PR department, corporate communications, and not the brand manager or the marketing manager that's in charge. This leads to a total different tone of voice of communication that is more serious often, more scientific, and especially more boring to mainstream consumers, which in the end, they won't see it because it's a different tone of voice. They won't recognize it as really credible part of your branding strategy. Also, they won't notice it because we're using different channels. I see my LinkedIn feed flooded with sustainability messages, but if I look at the TV, I don't see that many commercials stressing the sustainability of the same brands because it's made by a different department and they're a bit hesitant to communicate openly about the sustainability of the brand. Now, we might think this is a good option, but it can lead to the wrong reaction of consumers. If they see this, they might think, and even your own employees might think, okay, but this is a PR campaign, it's a CEO talking, so we're not really serious about this. This is more our public relations to the stakeholders and shareholders. It's not really our business to be involved with sustainability. That's not the message that you want to bring. If you change your tone of voice when you talk about sustainability, you will lose your credibility with consumers, or you won't even be seen as a sustainable brand. So the last example I want to give is an induction movie, a movie that Absolute Vodka, part of the Pernod Ricard group, also active with the winemakers in Australia, is showing to every employee that starts to work at the Absolute Vodka in Sweden. And I will show you a small part of this.
Our production process is CO2 neutral, and we don't like to waste a thing. That's why our excess tillage is used to feed local pigs and cows every day, unlike Latvia. But the most important ingredient that goes into Absolute is our people. So you see, every single drop that goes into every single bottle of Absolute vodka anywhere in the world comes from here in Overshoot. And that's why we're the vodka with nothing to hide. Welcome to Absolute.
Yeah, so a small part of the movie where they talk about sustainability, but they keep their tone of voice. And also all the people you saw were 28 employees working for Absolute, including the CEO, the VP of sustainability, the PR responsible, all being very transparent about the strategy of the company. So it might be an idea for your company as well. So to end the presentation, we were talking about the 4 golden rules of communicating about sustainability. Don't forget that if you're not communicating, you're actually communicating we're not sustainable. And we also started this chapter with speaking about the 4 benefits of sustainable branding, and there's business in doing good business. So we shouldn't just do it because we don't want Greta to be mad at us or the young generation. There's also really a business case of sustainability. Thanks so much for your time and attention. And I think before we go to the Q&A and we'll have a look at your questions, that Erica will take over from here. Erica, the floor is yours. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Yuri. Before going into our Q&A, I'm just going to share a few cases. It'll also give Yuri a chance to look at your questions to give you great answers about some different challenges that we've solved for clients. Because we know solving for sustainability, we've demonstrated quite clearly how important it is to consumers, but it's also hard for clients to really solve for this problem. And because we truly believe in the power of consumers to shape the future of brands, we also acknowledge that it takes the right consumer for the right task. So sometimes when we're solving for your challenges commercially, we talk to different consumers to solve that problem. The bulk of the work we do is with the 90% of mainstream consumers who are able to feedback, optimize, screen and validate what we share with them. And they represent the majority of your population that help optimize, generate and activate insights. Sometimes we need to uncover emerging trends, and I'll share a case with you from a client who tapped into our Loom network, a more niche group of leading edge consumers who are able to spot trends and changes in society early in the cycle. And sometimes, last but definitely not least, we need to trap into a truly fresh thinking through that 1% of creative people in our ICA network. And sometimes you really need to put that brief out there into that creative playground to really come up with some fresh ideas at global scale to solve for the challenges in bringing sustainability to consumers. And this could be in your comms, in products, packaging, or services. So this first one I'm going to now from Bosch, this first case, is an example using our Loom network. And Bosch were very much thinking of their positioning in terms of technology being invented for life as their purpose. And they were thinking about securing their lasting success in this area, but wanting to play a pioneering role in climate action out of conviction and a sense of responsibility. But they also recognise that it's difficult to understand consumer perceptions in sustainability, as there are so many overlapping complex thoughts and emotions. So Bosch with us, using our Loom community, did a deep dive to try and understand the nuances of the debate and in a future thinking way, and to develop a framework for exploring and measuring sustainability. So first of all, we did the deep dive with the Loom community to understand the nuances. And secondly, we then looked at how those areas teased out through our Loom community landed with mainstream consumers in primary research. So first of all, landscaping and trends, the scope to explore what they're thinking with leading consumers, truths and tensions. And secondly, understand how these land with consumers. In another case, using Orange, we're now using more general consumer trends, not leading edge consumers. Orange wanted to look out for how it could use research, not just in communications, but also how they could land this in an environmental and energy market. Their objective, obviously, is clear: to reduce CO2 emissions. And with their technologies and their resources, they're already advancing along this path. However, COVID has brought for them specific challenges, knowing that consumers are dealing with very different financial realities. So we've helped them in the last month understand a consumer segmentation of their consumers to understand how different consumers could adapt to different models around sustainability, taking account their own personal circumstances. The objective here is to build for the business an insights playbook of new business models that lands within the current economic reality of their consumers. Trying to help L'Oreal beat the plastic demons is another project we've worked on. L'Oreal set about using the first cosmetic tubes that incorporate a part of cardboard. The brand here is trying to move towards its goal of drastically reducing its environmental impact. And the new tube reduces by 45% the quantity of plastic required for its manufacture compared to conventional tubes. And again, as Yuri shared in his presentation, the product is not just about being better in terms of its environmental footprint, but also what is inside the packaging is good for you. So good for the planet and good for you. A project focused on reducing the environmental footprint, communicating this to consumers, and also making sure that the product formulation is safe for marine ecosystems, maximising efficiency. And finally, a case we worked on this year with Nestle and their Kit Kat brand, following an initial immersion with consumers qualitatively and followed up with quant research to understand consumer behaviours in Kit Kat in recycling. Kit Kat was really trying to understand what consumers were doing currently regarding soft plastics, specifically chocolate and lolly wrappers. So using approaches to get beyond the rational, such as implicit measures in the quant, once we understood what the breadth of the behaviours were, we supported the team to build research insights that reach beyond rational. And the research highlighted that whilst most people have good intentions, as Yuri showed us, they think about binning rubbish at home before actually understanding what is the right behaviour. So through a lack of knowledge around what to do with soft plastics. So this is an example where the brand is working to try and educate and remind consumers. And the research supported the bold action that they took to replace their brand front of pack and use the recycling symbol to educate and remind consumers as to what they can be doing with soft plastics. So I've shared here some case studies to try and bring to life to you some of the different things that you could be doing to try and highlight sustainability in your product innovations, your messaging, and your consumer connection. So with this, I would like to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. There's been a lot of interest in the content today, and we've really enjoyed sharing what we found from you. And thank you, Yuri, for staying up late and sharing your expertise with us today for our Sydney morning. If you have any more questions, you can send them directly to Yuri or to us using contact us at insights-consulting.com. So thank you for joining us. I wish you all the best. Stay safe. And if we don't see you in the next weeks, enjoy your Aussie summer and stay cool. Bye, everyone.